Chemistry. What do I have to say about chemistry? Well, there's a whole lot. How about the fact that it's so confusing? And why would I even need chemistry if all I want to do is study fish? Well, chemistry is actually really important in dealing with aquatic life. Water is full of many different micro and macro molecules which have differing impacts on fish and plant health. Each aquatic species has evolved to thrive in water with specific pH, hardness, and alkaline properties. Temperature also plays a role in maintaining healthy fish and plants. But what do all these words mean, and how does chemistry relate to them? Let's talk about it. Before I get into the more complicated bits, let us first take a look at what water is made out of. Water itself is made of 2 hydrogen atoms to every 1 oxygen atom. You're probably already aware of this if you have any knowledge of chemistry, but what you might not know is that water is what's called a polar molecule. The oxygen in H2O has a slightly negative charge because it has more electrons than the hydrogens, which are slightly positive. These charges play a big part in why water is so important. But for this video, you only need to know that this polarity allows other polar molecules to dissolve in water. These molecules include ammonia, sodium, phosphate, and a whole bunch of others that I won't be getting into this video. One of the molecules that dissolves into water is actually oxygen itself. Now, I know what you're thinking, of course there's oxygen in water. Water is made of oxygen, but that is not the oxygen I'm talking about. The oxygen that is dissolved into water is actually a molecule made up of 2 oxygens, double bonded together, and it comes from 2 main sources: the air and the plants in the water. As water moves, different sections of it come into contact with air and pulls in O2 molecules. More turbulent water is able to pick up more oxygen, whereas calm water has a hard time getting a hold of large amounts, if any at all. This is where the second source of oxygen comes into play: plants. During the day, plants undergo photosynthesis, which you probably have already learned about. But to put it simply, photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water to create sugar and oxygen. The oxygen created by aquatic plants disperses directly into the water to be further absorbed by aquatic animals. But plants still need carbon dioxide to create oxygen. Fortunately, plants and animals undergo this neat little process called cellular respiration. This process is essentially the inverse of photosynthesis. Oxygen and sugar, the products of photosynthesis, are used to create energy, and by extension, CO2. It's all an elaborate circle of giving and taking. The cycle of oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange directly impacts another important aspect of water chemistry: pH. If you're like me and are interested in keeping fish as pets, you may have heard of pH but aren't quite sure of what it is. Well, pH is the measure of how acidic or basic a substance is. A highly acidic solution is corrosive and tastes sour. Think of citrus. Basic solutions can be highly corrosive too, but those taste more bitter. Think saltwater. Every organism has a pH they thrive in, and our underwater friends are no different. Most fish thrive between a 6 to 9 pH, and water which is exceptionally acidic or basic can lead to severe disease, malformations, and even death. Fortunately, or unfortunately in some cases, pH changes depending on how much oxygen or carbon dioxide is in the water. The more CO2 is in a body of water, the lower its pH. This is because CO2 is slightly acidic on its own. As a result, during the night, when plants aren't undergoing photosynthesis, the pH of water is on the lower end of its ideal range. Then, as the plants wake up and start taking in all the CO2, the pH of water rises to the higher end of its ideal range. However, if CO2 is produced faster than it can be used, the water would become entirely too acidic for anything to survive. This is part of the reason why carbon emissions play such a huge role in processes like ocean acidification, but that's for another video. We can't eliminate all CO2 though, as without it, water would become too basic, and, well, no one likes things that are too basic, do they? Water's pH is also affected by two measures called alkalinity and hardness. Alkalinity is the measure of how well water can absorb acids and bases. Specifically, alkalinity measures negatively charged ions in water, such as carbonate and bicarbonate. A higher alkalinity means the pH shift as CO2 in water increases is reduced. So instead of the pH going from, say, 9 to 6, it may only decrease from 9 to 8. The opposite is also true. A lower alkalinity would increase the shift in pH during gas exchange. So a 9 to 8 shift would increase to a difference of 9 to 6. As with pH, fish and plants have evolved to survive in specific alkalinity levels. African cichlids, for example, popular in the aquarium trade, thrive in high alkaline and basic water. Hardness is similar to alkalinity, but measures positively charged calcium and magnesium ions instead. As a result, hard water is not necessarily alkaline, though this can be the case. While incompatible hardness isn't as detrimental to an adult fish as some other water quality measures, which we will get into soon, it can affect how fish develop and grow. Calcium is what makes up bones, as you may know, exoskeletons, and other tissues, and is constantly being absorbed into the skin of aquatic organisms. Water must be at an optimal hardness in order for the cells of the organisms living in it to grow and reproduce appropriately. A hardness too high may be toxic to a fish, but one too low could stunt the fish's growth to a dangerous degree. It needs to be just right. Some of the most important factors to be aware of when determining if water is healthy for the organisms living in it is the amount of nitrogenous waste in it. Nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia build up over time as a result of fish waste and decaying organic matter. In a wild environment, these molecules are used up by growing plants or are eaten by detritivores, which can range between visible invertebrates and arthropods all the way down to microscopic bacteria. But in controlled aquariums, the rate at which nitrogenous waste is produced may be greater than the rate at which it is used. Nitrate, nitrite, and ammonia are all connected, so if one molecule is abundant, the other two will soon become problems. Ammonia especially has a significant impact on the level of nitrites and nitrates in water. This is because ammonia-eating bacteria must first break down the molecule into nitrites before breaking it down into nitrates. Nitrite and ammonia are of the most concern and can immediately impact the health of fish and plants if there is an overabundance. But nitrates can be tolerated in higher amounts. However, nitrates may cause excessive algae growth and can therefore become a major problem, leading to large-scale plant decay as algae uses all of the available nutrients for itself. And more decay equals more ammonia and nitrite. But in my opinion, the most important factor in determining the health of a body of water that is often overlooked is temperature. Temperature affects all of the previously stated measurements in significant ways. Temperature affects both the metabolic rates of aquatic organisms as well as the reaction rates within the water itself. In other words, processes that break down ammonia will become slower in colder temperatures and faster in higher temperatures. And the processes which allowed oxygen to dissolve into a fish's bloodstream would also be affected in this way. Aquatic organisms have specific temperature ranges they have evolved to thrive in, as do all terrestrial organisms. For example, a tropical fish like the common neon tetra need their water to be between 72 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, which is equivalent to 22 to 26 degrees Celsius. This is the range in which their intercellular processes can function normally. If you place a neon tetra in an ice bath, its metabolism will decrease to a dangerous extent. Conversely, if the water is too hot, the tetra's metabolism will increase dramatically, and the fish will become incredibly stressed. The same can be said for plants and bacteria. Temperature also impacts the rate at which materials dissolve in water. Oxygen, for example, has more trouble dissolving into water that is colder. pH, toxic ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate all increase as temperature increases, which means warm waters need a lot of plants and detritivores to balance the number of harmful molecules in water, something which a lot of aquariums don't have. Fortunately, water has a high specific heat capacity. This means that water takes a long time to change temperature and is therefore less likely to fluctuate drastically, thus ensuring the safety of all organisms who live within it. Unfortunately, human activity such as the paving of roads has greatly impacted the temperature of water runoff. Rainwater washing over a hot road not only causes pollutants to be dragged into nearby waterways, it also causes the water to become incredibly hot. Water's high specific heat capacity cannot overcome the heat of a paved road, and eventually you are left with extremely hot water flowing into every natural system. Aquariums are not safe from this heat fluctuation either, as heaters can malfunction and could, to put it bluntly, boil your fish if you're not careful. But as a side note, just because a heater might malfunction does not mean you can place a tropical fish into an aquarium without one. I mean, how would you like it if you were forced to live in a cold box with no clothes? Much to my chagrin, chemistry is quite important to be aware of when trying to keep fish and invertebrates happy and healthy. Of course, there are other factors such as salinity, which will be discussed in a later video about saltwater chemistry. These are just the main factors to take into account when determining the health of a freshwater system.